after it's run for about 5 years in the United States, you've only used about 4% of that energy value.
Is nuclear waste the solution to our AI-driven power crisis? Hello and welcome to TechFirst. My name is John Koetsier. We have a lot of nuclear waste in the world, something like 400, 500,000 tons of this stuff. And guess what? We're using a ton of energy right now to drive new generative AI experiences, engines, all that stuff. There's a bit of a shortage. I mean, Microsoft's using some nuclear power from 3 Mile Island to drive some of their server farms. Can we solve two of these problems, both these problems at the same time? One startup says the answer is yes, and the CEO is a former acting assistant secretary for nuclear energy at the DOE, Department of Energy. His name is Ed McGinnis. Welcome, Ed.
Pleasure to be here, John.
Hey, super pumped to have you. Big question is, can we kill two birds with one stone?
Not just two, but three or more.
Wow.
That's the beauty of innovation, and that's the beauty of, I would say, a subsector of the broader nuclear sector having been stuck in a ditch for decades, literally sidelined since President Carter decided to ban nuclear reprocessing, nuclear recycling, not because there was no value in the remaining used nuclear fuel after it was used once in the U.S. nuclear reactor, for example, but because of international security reasons. So the nuclear sector has been plagued like a ball and chain, really held back in large part because of a lack of a real viable, reasonable, intuitively, understanding and win-win-win approach for dealing with what is more accurately described as slightly used nuclear fuel. Trust me, it took me 30 years to have that epiphany, or that it literally, when you have nuclear fuel where you dig it out of the ground, uranium ore, and you expend a lot of effort to refine it, if you will, to enrich it to the point where it can be put in a nuclear reactor as the core and then create electricity. In the U.S., nuclear reactors typically have that fuel go in and run it for about 5 years. Then they pull it out. They put it in pools to keep it, because it's particularly hot, as we say, high radioactivity. And when it gets to a sufficient level of having cooled off a bit, being submerged in these deep pools, then they put it on pads in these dry cask systems, typically. And that's it. The government policy, going all the way back to Carter, de facto took this material that has still a huge amount of highly valuable material, and because of a policy decision, de facto made it waste. But it's not waste at all.
Let's go into that exactly. So if I go to the used car lot and I look at the cars, here's one with 50,000 miles, here's one with 100,000, 300,000, and they've got 50% of their lifespan left, 75%, 25%. These fuel rods they're taking out of U.S. nuclear reactors. How much of their energy is left?
In general, after it's run for about 5 years in the United States, since we don't recycle it, and we just put it on the pads waiting for the federal government to take the material out back, which they have not done, and they were supposed to be doing that since 1997 by law, you've only used about 4% of that energy value. Now, here is the fascinating aspect of it. It's even better than just that, because when the magic of uranium, when it's fissioning, actually generates a plethora of other highly valuable isotopes for medical purposes, isotopes for space exploration, isotopes for industrial processes. And on top of it, you might not know this, most people don't, during the fissioning process, you not only have additional radioisotopes that are created essentially as part of this fissioning process over 5 years, you actually have rare, precious metals that are created as
Transmutation.
essentially. And I'll get to that because that's part of our business. So, what do you think the most expensive metal in the world is in the market right now?
I, I'm going to go with uranium.
Oh, no, not even close. It's rhodium. So
Would not have
rhodium,
guessed that.
if you look up the price, it's the most expensive metal in the world right now. That's why you see catalytic converters stolen because they have very, very small amounts of rhodium, among other things.
Wow.
Yeah. So we are deploying my company a state of the art, highest throughput, most compact nuclear recycling facility that we plan to have commercially deployed, hopefully in about 5 to 7 years, maybe earlier. But at full capacity, our recycling facility is in the position to produce almost 10% of the world's demand for rhodium.
Wow.
That's how much is resident in our 92,000 metric tons of used nuclear fuel, slightly sitting around this country. You have palladium as well.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have these isotopes, krypton 85, very important for medical imaging, for detecting leaks in certain types of reactors. You've got americium 241 that is highly valuable long-term power sources, maybe an alternative to plutonium 238, which powers the only two man-made objects in interstellar space right now, and that's Voyager 1, Voyager 2, powered by
Mm-hmm.
what?
Mm-hmm.
A
Mm-hmm.
radioisotope thermoelectric generator,
Mm-hmm.
as we
Mm-hmm.
see with some of the rovers on Mars. So you talk, going back to the win-win-win. This is a classic case. I like to quote or summarize Warren Buffett. I was watching an interview with him. And in general, he said, look, if you have done your research and if you believe you see a golden goose market opportunity, and if you believe in your due diligence that there is a huge market, that's not enough to be successful. You need the second half of that if you're an innovator like us, a startup company. You also have to essentially, in most cases, have everybody else think it's a dog. Isn't that the whole point? If you're an innovator, that means you see something others haven't seen or don't believe or haven't been able to get to.
Yep.
So being an innovator takes a lot of guts, a lot of chutzpah,
Yeah.
and you really have to believe it. And so this is a classic case where one person's waste is another person's treasure. The U.S. used nuclear fuel that's sitting around the country because of government policies treated as waste has enough energy value in it, according to scientists at the U.S. national labs, to meet all of the U.S. electricity needs for the next 150 years.
Wow. Wow. So there you go. You've got not just win-win. You've got not just win-win-win. You've got, I can't count the number of wins because, of course, you've got nuclear fuel that you are recycling. That's a good thing. You get the energy out of it that we need for lots of different things. That's a good thing. You get all of these different byproducts, which are individual wins, the rhodium and the palladium and the krypton and other things like that you're talking about. So there's a lot here that is excellent and good. Is your solution a portable solution? Do you go to the nuclear waste or does the nuclear waste come to you?
Our business model primarily is for the waste to come to us because we want economy of scales. So remember I said we're the largest, I think I said the largest nuclear fleet in the world. That means we have the largest amount of so-called waste. And
Mm-hmm.
because of our particular policy since Carter, that material has been untapped after
Mm-hmm.
using it once. It's like having a
Mm-hmm.
Cadillac Escalade, driving it for a month and throwing it away. But that's what
Mm-hmm.
we've done. And so now that material has been sitting there
Mm-hmm.
for years and years. Some of it, some is still fresh.
Mm-hmm.
But our approach is, since we have large volumes, which with large volumes of essentially commodities waiting to be extracted, think of us as twofold. One is we're going to be the waste collector.
Mm-hmm.
There's a multi-billion-dollar business in just disposing of
Mm-hmm.
unrecycled used nuclear fuel, so-called waste. And then once we collect it, we're going to be in the mining business,
Mm-hmm.
commodity extraction business. Every isotope that has value, we're going to pull it out. We
Mm-hmm.
have actually offtake agreements and indicators for 10 different isotopes. Just one of those isotopes has the potential of carrying over $1 billion a year in revenue. So
Amazing.
we are going at economy of scale so that we can produce as much as the market needs. And that's why we designed a facility in a chemistry process that is designed for having the highest throughput possible.
Mm-hmm.
Our
Mm-hmm.
facility, as designed, full commercial scale, with the latest in modular systems, latest in autonomy, the latest in compactness. Yet it's going to be the highest throughput. We're going to have the size of a large football field where all the other reprocessing facilities around the world, France, Russia, Japan, these are sizes of small cities and incredibly antiquated
Mm-hmm.
processes that they're
Mm-hmm.
already wedded to and they can't walk away from
Mm-hmm.
$20 billion investment. And they're all government
Mm-hmm.
owned.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're the first company that is attempting to get into the market at national scale. There are a couple of companies going at smaller scale just for their micro reactor potential recycling. We're going at the market at a macro national scale,
Mm-hmm.
multiple commodities. And when we pull out, for example, let me say this. So 10 different isotopes or elements, 8 isotopes, and then 2 precious metals. 2 of those isotopes are forms of nuclear fuel.
Mm-hmm.
One is uranium. We will pull out enough from this full commercial to provide as much as a third of the entire United States nuclear uranium feedstock annually from one facility. And then we have another fuel, and that's our fuel of choice. We have 2 reactors, a nanoreactor and a small modular reactor under development. And we developed it to be fueled by our recycled plutonium,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
but with a security barrier built in. In other words,
Mm-hmm.
plutonium is a proliferation
Yep.
concern. And
Yep.
so we never extract it as a pure stream of plutonium, which is the way they do it in France and others. They're using this essentially the base process that came out of the Manhattan Project in World War
Yes.
II.
Yes.
Yeah,
Weapons refinement.
essentially the same thing. And so, and I'll explain some of the other things we did, but we designed our recycling from scratch to meet the priorities of U.S. needs and U.S. policy issues, environmental security and economics. So
Yeah.
at the end of the day, we are going to have probably 1 or 2, maybe 3 consolidation points
Yeah.
where the material comes in, we recycle that material. And oh, by the way, I don't know if I mentioned, the way it's done around the world today is one way. It's called Purex. That's it. That's the process that came out of Oppenheimer, Manhattan Project, build the bomb as quickly as possible before Germany.
Mm-hmm.
Back then, their priority was extracting plutonium.
Mm-hmm.
Their priority wasn't doing it in the most environmentally sustainable way. That's why they used nitric acid. Nitric acid. So think
Wow.
about it. Even to this day, everybody, all the in Russia, France, Japan, they take the fuel assemblies from the reactors, commercial reactors, and they immerse them in nitric acid. And these fuel assemblies are already highly radioactive. And then you're
Mm-hmm.
mixing it in with other nitric acid. You're creating
Mm-hmm.
more waste by the end,
Yes.
ironically,
Yes.
than you started.
Yes.
So we said we're eliminating that. So we use a superheated pyro process, a largely dry process, and in combination with an electrolysis process with cathodes, almost like a
Okay.
magnetic current.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then because at the end of the day, uranium and all the virtually everything that comes out of the fission product they're they're metal elements,
Yeah.
right?
They're
This is
magnetic.
metal,
Yeah.
metal. And
Uh-huh.
so even sodium, salt,
Uh-huh.
at the end of the day. So you can, in electrolysis fashion, separate out different isotopes. And in the heated process, in the fluorination process, you can adjust temperatures, and then the different isotopes, krypton
They
85
melt at different
might
levels.
become
Hmm.
airborne, and then the heavier uranium doesn't. It's almost like
Hmm.
cooking. You cook and you reduce, and suddenly, or let's say you cook and then the butter rises or the fat rises, depending on the temperature. It's chemistry, right?
That's
So
genius. That's absolute
so
genius
we
because,
eliminated the use of nitric acid.
yeah.
That's the secret sauce that allows us to reduce the amount of high level radioactive waste that needs to be deeply
Hmm.
geologically disposed of, according to law in the U.S., to only about 4% of the original high level waste. So not in, I use 4%, so I don't want to get confused. There's only 4% of the energy that one is used after running it in a typical US reactor for about 5 years. And with our dry non-nitric acid, non-aqueous process, after we recycle, we're only going to have about 4% of the original high level radioactive waste left, because we're separating out without nitric acid, we're separating out the low level waste, and we'll have that stream. But low level waste is disposed of every day in this country. We have
Hmm.
facilities, commercial facilities in Utah, Texas, and others. So we can handle that. But the high level waste, that's the tough stuff, because
Hmm.
the Nuclear
Hmm.
Regulatory Commission, I would say, justifiably, they put in a requirement that if this material is not recycled, based on non recycled material, ironically, when it comes out of that reactor after 5 years, it's at its highest level of
Hmm.
radiotoxicity, arguably,
Hmm. Hmm.
if you don't recycle it. And
Hmm.
so the irony is, if you don't recycle it, you are pulling out that material and attempting to throw it away, where it's unsafe, according to the Nuclear
Hmm.
Regulatory Commission, for people to be exposed to for at least 10,000 years.
Yeah.
So they require a repository that can be demonstrated to be a secure,
Safe,
sequestered
geologically
spot
safe.
for
Yeah.
10,000 years. Who can do that? So it's an almost impossible standard. And why would you, if you can recycle it? And here's the kicker: talk about triple bank shots or whatever, or killing three birds with one stone too. When we recycle, we are pulling out a lot of the isotopes that are long-lived radioisotopes that
Hmm.
drive that 10,000 year requirement. We're pulling those out, and we're going to use those for
Hmm.
medical,
Hmm.
for space exploration. We're pulling that out. Then we're pulling out the plutonium, and then the uranium, and some of the other isotopes that are the drivers for that long term horizon. And then guess what we're left with? We're left with the remaining 4%, 3 or 4%, primarily fission products. And yes, they're highly radioactive, but their half life is much shorter.
Nice.
So short
Nice.
that, relatively speaking, we believe we'll only have to have it demonstrated for safe disposal geologically for 300 years.
Wow.
So you're going to 3 to 4% of what you originally had, and only 300 years instead of 10,000 years.
Yeah.
And suddenly the options for disposing of that are significant. You
Yeah.
don't need a giant Yucca mountain. You don't
Hmm.
need
Hmm.
100, $200 billion facility. You can actually put it 15,000 feet in four boreholes. The
Hmm.
sum total of the entire U.S. 4% remaining waste can go in probably about four boreholes,
Wow.
15,000 feet in the ground.
Wow.
So some are doing retrievable. That's harder. You don't have to go 15,000 feet. But if you've already extracted everything that you believe has value, and you only have that small amount,
Hmm.
all of a sudden you have all kinds of options.
So this is pretty amazing. This is pretty incredible because, I mean, we've seen things like Fukushima, where there's a certain amount, obviously, of the high intensity radioactive stuff, and they're always making more material because they've got to cool it. They're always making more material that's radioactive, right? Because they've got to cool it. So they've got enormous numbers of tanks of contaminated water. And about a half a year ago, they just started releasing that to the ocean because it's fairly low level. They think it's fairly safe, but there's just no other option there. In the U.S., you talked about Yucca Mountain. That's been around for it's got to be decades now that people have been saying that's the place, and there's just been political pressure and no NIMBY and not in my backyard and don't want it there. But if you reduce the amount of material, that would be absolutely incredible, and you're making something useful from it as well. Talk about how real this is, how close you are. Like let's say somebody gave you $1 billion tomorrow and said, do it. You've got the contract, you've got the rights. How soon can you be up and running?
We're already having people offer that. And I will tell you this, here's where we are. So about 3.5 years ago, this concept was developed, our design, by the founder of my company, an amazing, brilliant guy, and another nuke engineer, and his brother. And that was based on a lot of research, sort of like that Warren Buffett research. And they saw the big market untapped as the back end. One person's waste is really another person's treasure. We have a crowded field in the front end of the nuclear sector, the reactors. A lot of people are trying to get in. Almost no one is attempting to go into the back end and through the waste. And I call it low hanging fruit if you have enough chutzpah to do it. But where are we? We have this. We have our recycling design. It's fully patented. About 2.5 years ago, we were at the point where we're ready to demonstrate this, to show that we can actually extract these isotopes and do it in a dry process in a secure way, and we're ready to go. We were going to do it one way or another, whether it was partnering with the federal government or not. But we would prefer to partner with the federal government because they have unique global, just top class capabilities in testing and in nuclear related research and development, and world class engineers and scientists. So I work the Department of Energy. I know the labs. I know where a lot of the talent is. So we actually identified 4 different national labs that each had core world class expertise in the different parts of our chemistry, of our process. We actually then went to the labs, and pretty much they were amazed. And these are people that had been working their whole lives, and some were pioneers in the fluorination process of our product. Some were pioneers in the electrolysis side. And then here comes this group, other than me, young, and feeling, saying, hey, Eureka, we figured it out. There's a lot of pride in the national labs. And they're not going to say you solved something that I've been working my whole career if they didn't believe it. And by the time we left, all 4 labs said, we want to join you and partner with you as a lead. We did that. We then competed for an advanced nuclear recycling contract at the Department of Energy, and we won.
Cool.
And so they decided they're going to fund us 80% if we go forth and do the demonstration at the national labs. It's a 3-year lab scale demonstration. We just completed our 2nd year, and we're barreling down on the last year, and we have essentially gone through most of the key scientific, chemistry demonstrations proving this works. And so by March or so of next year, we expect to have completed our lab scale demonstration at Idaho National Lab, the lead nuclear engineering lab in the country, with actual commercial, slightly used nuclear fuel, hot material, in what we call a hot cell. Now, concurrently, we are now already looking for a larger facility to scale up to
Mm-hmm.
commercial scale recycling.
Mm-hmm.
And we are expecting to have that completed between 3 to 5 years from now.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe even
Mm-hmm.
some opportunity for acceleration, where we're
Mm-hmm.
going to be able to pull out isotopes, pull out including fuel, and show we can be a waste disposal agent or minimization to 4% and
Mm-hmm.
be a major fuel supplier in this country, isotopes, you name it. So that's where we are. We will be what we call a technology readiness about 6 by March, which is pretty
Gotcha.
good. TRL9, you're off to the races in the market.
Yeah.
Concurrently, again, we're vertically integrated. I call it horizontally integrated innovation stack company, meaning that everything we do is designed to be synergistic with our other technology, our backbone technology, recycling. And
Mm-hmm.
then what comes out of that? Fuel.
Mm-hmm.
So we designed a reactor that is custom designed for that fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what happens, I would argue, that it's the reverse. The companies try and go into the market with reactors,
Sure.
and then they shoehorn in the available fuel. We have reactors that were being deployed, and mid design, they shift and said, oh, that's not available, that fuel. I'm going to go with HALEU fuel, this
Mm-hmm.
other fuel.
Mm-hmm.
I
Mm-hmm.
would argue, and we're flipping the script because our philosophy is it's like Microsoft when they were partnering or they went to IBM and IBM
Yeah.
made a horrible,
Yes.
horrible decision,
Yes.
legacy mistake when their mind, IBM, hardware was the future.
Mm-hmm.
Bill Gates and team, they're like, oh no, software is the future. Software drives the hardware in the computer business, in my view, not vice versa. It's similar in nuclear. The reactor design doesn't drive the fuel. The fuel, that's the software, that drives the reactor. So, what does that mean? It translates into this, John. Um, Plutonium is a better fuel than uranium, but plutonium is not commercially largely available.
No.
Plutonium is, we have a reactor that's going to be a third the size of even the advanced uranium based reactor because plutonium has a higher density of power and lower weight ratio.
Mm-hmm.
And we're
Mm-hmm.
building a prototype because of that. So our reactor is going to be what we call true fuel. It's plutonium based with a security blanket wrapped around it of self-protecting isotopes that if you try to get to the plutonium for bad purposes, you'll probably die trying. But it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't affect the neutronic performance of that fuel. We call it true fuel. So our reactor is going to be a true fuel based reactor. We'll have our own supply. We'll be able to build smaller reactors, cheaper, deploy them in different ways that one couldn't. So this is a big, so that's what I mean by innovation stack. And guess what? We
Mm-hmm.
get all these isotopes out of it as we're recycling it,
Sure.
as we're bringing down the waste. This is a across the board innovation stack. If we hit it, if we pull this off, we're going to be the only game in town the way we offer it. If
When
we
you
do.
say smaller reactor, is that a microreactor or just smaller than a standard
Any
nuclear
reactor
reactor?
you use, if you use plutonium, it's going to be smaller because you need
Mm-hmm.
less plutonium than you do
Mm-hmm.
uranium. Unless
Mm-hmm.
you use high enriched uranium, which you're not going to use because high enriched uranium is definitely too much of a security concern.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so you don't see it in the civilian market. You see low enriched uranium, which is 4.5%. And now you're starting to see the demand for the advanced reactors with a higher enrichment, but still considered low enrichment, which is up to
Mm-hmm.
20%. So
Mm-hmm.
you've got these high assay, low enriched uranium fuel, which is just below that threshold of 20% enrichment. And if it's over 20%, it's considered now in the nuclear
Weapons grade.
weapons
Yeah.
usable range, right?
Yeah. Yeah. That
And
makes
so
sense.
so uranium is the fuel that powers virtually all the reactors around the world commercially.
Mm-hmm.
except for mixed oxide waste, MOX, the
Mm-hmm.
combination of uranium, plutonium. But ours is going to be powered by, we have a micro reactor, refer to it as a nano reactor. We're building it right now. We're building a
Mm-hmm.
prototype right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a small modular reactor under design development, 250 megawatt electric approximately. It's a molten salt reactor.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of the day, the future of nuclear, if we just, you know, open the aperture for the private sector to come in and innovate and remove some of the handcuffs, like, no, you have to treat this as waste, even though it
Mm-hmm.
makes no sense to do that other than international security reasons, which actually didn't turn out to be the best call. If you do that, I'll say something sort of bold. Nuclear in the future, if we bring advanced recycling with fast reactors and really design it in a synergistic way, nuclear one day will be truly renewable, because you will have a fast reactor that breeds and then burns it,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
and then you're
Mm-hmm.
recycling it, breed and burn, and then you throw in thorium,
Mm-hmm.
and then that's the holy grail of
Mm-hmm.
nuclear. And we have a thorium-based advanced reactor as the next gen beyond our reactor now we call HOPE.
Yep.
And our
Yep.
engineers, they're brilliant, and they also like to have fun, and they love coming up with different new names. And this one
Sure.
is the HOPE, because we have hope. But what does it stand for? Homogeneous plutonium eliminating reactor. So you have to have fun when you're in a intense business like this.
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. It's pretty interesting, actually, because you said way back when we were chatting a little earlier that with this in full swing, you could provide basically a third of the amount of nuclear fuel that the U.S. requires, which is interesting because,
Just the
yeah,
uranium.
exactly,
And
just
if
in
we have
uranium.
new reactors coming in, a whole new class that's powered by plutonium with the security blanket wrapped around it, that's a whole new generation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And humbly, in my humble opinion, my company's opinion, the future is largely going to be driven, if we pull this off, by transuranic fuels, by plutonium, because it's lower weight ratio, higher density. You just have to make sure you build in robust security.
Very robust security indeed. Yeah. But the interesting part for me is that the U.S. imports a lot of its uranium. I happen to be Canadian, and there's a
Yeah,
lot of Canadian uranium that the U.S. has. And
absolutely.
of course, there's lots of trade tensions these days, not just between U.S. and Canada, but between U.S. and many other nations. And we just saw, the impact of rare earths, which the U.S. imports 100% of those pretty much from China.
Right,
And if that spigot gets turned off, then there's issues, right? So every nation needs to decide what is kind of critical to their national security. And that's not just
right,
military. That's a lot of support. That's a lot of infrastructure. That's a lot of materials that you need to for your economy to run. And if you can do that with basically the stuff you have that you're throwing away right now, and actually can't even throw away, you just have to hold on to it somewhere and hope it's
right.
safe and sort of kind of safe. That's huge.
Right, exactly. And at the end of the day, there is a premium, as you referred to, for domestic production of certain fuels, materials that are considered sufficiently important that the country decides it is inimical to their interest to
Mm-hmm.
be totally dependent on foreign suppliers, whether it's
Mm-hmm.
chip manufacturing, rare earth critical minerals, food production, or energy. And so it is a shifting times, but nuclear is in this unique moment. And I would argue it is historic. I don't think nuclear has ever been in a stronger position for true growth, I think, in its history.
Could be, could be. I mean, we know that the Trump administration does not like green energy, especially windmills and solar and other things like that. So there's an opportunity here. Obviously,
But
your
it's not
window.
only that, it's data centers, it's the demand, the
Hmm.
big tech saying,
Hmm.
AI, there are, people are arguing that that's going to be perhaps even bigger than the arms race, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm.
the nuclear arms race.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so there is a huge um, set of moves being made to secure power 10, 20 years out for these data centers, because the data centers are what consuming about 5% of the entire US electricity right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going
Mm-hmm.
to, I think it's supposed to go up to about 13% in 5 years. And that's just data centers. And then they have the capital to bring into it, which we didn't have in nuclear before. Then you have an administration that says, it's not good that we're 100% dependent on suppliers, in particular, Russia being the dominant supplier, major supplier of nuclear fuel for enrichment. So, a bunch of things have come together, and you have an incredible appetite now by private capital. Look at Wall Street, these new nuclear startup companies. The valuations are just out, through the roof. So there's never been a better time for the nuclear sector to stand up and go beyond their grandparents' nuclear technology,
Mm-hmm.
reactors and sector, and bring
Mm-hmm.
in that entirely new class of ultra safe, environmentally sustainable, and economically robust tech.
I just pulled it up on ChatGPT here. Where does the U.S. get its nuclear fuel? 27% from Canada, 25% from Kazakhstan, 12% from Russia, which it used to be higher, but it's less since the Ukraine war. 11% from Uzbekistan, 9% from Australia, 5% domestic.
Right, and that has
5%.
increased it. And what you're talking about, John, is a piece of the nuclear fuel supply. That's why a lot of people don't fully understand the nature of producing nuclear fuel.
Mm-hmm.
Uranium, first you got to dig it out of the ground, and uranium
Yep.
is traded on the global market.
Yep.
That's what you're talking about.
Yes, it
And
is.
then, but you have to take that uranium, and then you have to enrich it in these
Right.
centrifuges. If you do chat GPT and ask who is the largest producer of, who's the largest uranium enricher, it's Russia. And that's the key. Much easier. I mean, uranium, that's not the tough part to get fuel. It's getting
You're
this.
bang on. I'll just answer that right. Well, just after you asked it, I mean, it's 10x, which is Rosatom, which is a Russian company, 40 to
Yeah,
55% of the global
exactly.
market.
They
They
have
do.
a dominant chokehold on the most important part. It's sort of, what's the comparison? I mean, it's like, all right, rubber for a tire, but just because you have a rubber tree, well, fine.
Yep.
No,
Yep.
you have to actually process it. So for uranium, yes, it's important, but the ore is. But the real key is what we call SWU, and
Yep.
that's the way they measure the amount of effort that goes into getting it to 4.5% or whatever it is. So Russia dominates the enrichment market right now. In the
Yep.
United States, we still depend over 20% on Russia, even today. And we're trying to wean ourselves off. But nuclear fuel, you can't just turn on a dime and switch
No,
suppliers.
no, no,
It
no.
takes time. And
Yeah.
so even though Biden passed the legislation banning uranium, Russian uranium, industry said, you got to give us time or we're going to have
Hmm.
rolling brownouts.
There's
Um,
only one plant in the US right now that actually enriches uranium, and it's not American. It's part
right,
of a
it's
European
Urenco,
consortium.
European,
Yeah.
right, and
Yeah.
and so
Exactly.
so that's part of the push. But what a lot of people don't realize is while we need that, we, where we can get nuclear fuel supply from our so-called waste. So we, in a recycling business, we are going to be a major nuclear fuel supplier. So we reduce the need to mine
Hmm.
by
Which is wonderful for environmental reasons,
Mhm.
all
And
kinds of
look,
reasons.
the uranium mining industry's got to play a key role.
Yeah.
We need all of the above. But if you can extract, um, if you can derive uranium fuel from what's been treated as waste, why wouldn't you do
Hmm.
that?
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Ed, I just have one more question for you. Did you ever think you'd be a garbage disposal guy?
No, the only thing I'll say is in my career, so often I was like a special assistant to, a high level person, whatever. In my career, it was always about, you know, how am I going to be successful? And yes, I'm a garbage collector now, or part of the movement. I want to be garbage collector, and then turn it into gold. But in my career, I always describe myself as a mailman. And back in the day when everybody relied on mail, and rain, sleet, or snow, you delivered the mail, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in
Mm-hmm.
my career, I always felt like I want to be, when I say I'm going to do something, I do it. I want to be responsive and I want to deliver.
Mm-hmm.
And so, deliver, we're also mailmen of yesteryear. We are going to deliver this tech. We're going to get it
Mm-hmm.
in the market and we're going to help absolutely unlock the full potential of not only the US, but the global nuclear market.
Super cool. Super cool. Thank you for taking this time.
My pleasure, John.